now with, the homeless population and going door to door and to service provider to service provider. We just know that we all have a limit, and so really coordinating those efforts so that we're not duplicating them is going to be the best thing to do. So
yeah, it does seem to be like you said, they hopped,
yep,
and it's a thing. So
absolutely.
unfortunately. All right, I'm going to try to send out this to all my peeps. I'll be right back.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is Denise with South Dakota Housing Development Authority. I think we have a few more people that have kind of been hopping on here, so I think we'll give it just another minute before we get started. Hopefully everybody can see my screen that I'm sharing. I have the PowerPoint up. But yeah, I just see a couple names popping up here, so we'll give it just one more minute before we get going. I know we started meetings a little early today, so. And if you haven't had a chance yet, if you want to go ahead and put your name and agency into the chat box, that would be great. So we can kind of track the attendance and who's all been able to participate. So. And we'll, at one point here with my PowerPoint, I'll kind of get out of this mode where I can actually type into the PowerPoint, because some of our slides we're going to set some new goals and some new action steps for 2020. So I'll be typing that information right into the PowerPoint when we get to that point, and then I think afterwards then we'll upload the PowerPoint to the website so that everybody can have access to it. So looks like we have about 16 of us, 17. So that's a good number. Hopefully we're getting all of our regular people that usually work with coordinated entry and some other people to the table that are interested in coordinated entry and want to kind of know what it's about and join that process with us. So. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Again, welcome everybody. I'm very happy that all of you could join. This is our Region 4 coordinated entry call, and Region 4 is our eastern side of the state. So in this region, Stephanie Monroe with Volunteers of America is the regional coordinator. We do have an access point with the ICAP office. Stephanie Richmond at the Sioux Falls office in ICAP is an access point. And then also, of course, we have our 800 number that covers the whole state. So I do think I saw that Madeline is on this call with Helpline Center. So we'll probably get a lot of input and a lot of information from her as we kind of work through our slides here. And also we'll kind of get to know kind of the providers that are at the call. So right now in Region 4, they have their calls scheduled monthly. They take place on the third Thursday of the month. So I think that'll be one of the things that we kind of talk about when we get to some of our 2020 goals and action steps. Is that working? Do we need to change that process? So all of those things. I really want this to be definitely some interactive conversation amongst all of you. I'm located in Pierre. So I really want input from all of you. You guys need to kind of have those conversations, what's working, what's not working, who's missing from our table, all of those types of things. So as we work through the slides, please feel free to unmute yourselves, speak up, have conversation. So let's see here. Let's go ahead and get started. So our Region 4 call today, we're going to review some of our 2019 goals and action steps that we had set last year at our annual meeting. We'll have some discussion on issues, problem solving for your region. Again, setting goals and some of those action steps. I think what we find is it's always when we set goals to set an action step to the goal so that we know who's going to move it forward, who's responsible to make some connections and talk to people. So the other thing I will remind everybody, we are recording these also, so we'll be able to post those too. So if you have a staff member or maybe a partner agency that wasn't able to attend today, we'll have that information available for them. So again, some of these announcements that you'll hear throughout all of our sessions, using the Skype chat box, feel free to type in questions, type in information, definitely your name and your agency so that we can track who's all able to attend. And always feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions and speak up, for sure. Our collaboration and our partnership with all of our service providers across our communities is really, really important when it comes to coordinated entry. The goal of coordinated entry is really to collaborate and coordinate our efforts so that we're not duplicating our efforts. We know in most situations, funding is limited for most agencies, funding is limited for most programs, so really being able to coordinate those efforts so that we're not all providing the same service is really helpful across our communities. So to go back to last year, and I know we have definitely some new agencies that might not have been part of our annual training that took place last year. So we thought it'd be good to just kind of review where we were at, where we are now. So one of the goals that we talked about last year, I know Helpline Center was talking about some help sheets that they were going to develop. And I know we've had some staff changing and some staff turnover at Helpline Center also. So I know this was something that was talked about a lot last year. I'm not sure. Madeline, are you aware at all of the help sheets? Were they created for the Sioux Falls area? I'm not even sure. I guess I didn't hear much about it after that. But again, because the staff changed, sometimes those things just, it's an idea maybe a staff has at the time that if that staff person's not there anymore, that might be what happens.
Yes, there are some help sheets available off of the 211 website that help with like evictions, obtaining driver's license, things like that. And I'd be more than happy to provide those links.
Okay, that would be great.
Yeah.
And do you know, Madeline, is that like a statewide, were they created for just certain communities?
Some of them are statewide. Some of them are directed just for Sioux Falls. Okay. It kind of depends. Like the eviction worksheet is actually for the entire state.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. I think if we could have those links and get them on our South Dakota Housing for the Homeless Consortium webpage too, I think that might be very helpful. So thank you. Case conferencing, of course, I think that will be an ongoing conversation always at every annual kind of meeting that we have. Engaging new partners, who's not at the table, who needs to be at the table, who have we not had conversations with maybe, or, that we can just kind of bring into the group. And I think we talked a lot, too, about focusing our call on those individuals that are on the list that maybe are not service-connected at all to this point. And I think that's a discussion that will definitely, one of our goals in setting some action steps moving forward. We have started, I think, some of those conversations in pretty much all of the regions, when somebody gets on that list, making sure we're having some follow-up contact with them outside of them just having completed the assessment with Madeline, just making sure that we're having some follow-up and some more conversation with them. And we did put in here so you can kind of see the information that I just talked about is coming from, we got to meet together last year and come together in person, which is always, our preference when we can, but we just kind of broke out into our regions and set up some tablets and just wrote down all of our kind of ideas and our issues we were having and how do we solve those problems. So you can kind of see here that a lot of those things, we have pictures of them, just to help us move things forward and kind of keep track of what we were doing. So there you can see our discussion on the help sheets. So that would be good if we can get connection to some of those things. And then our concerns. So from Region 4 last year, we kind of talked about adding more agencies to the case conferencing. Does that lengthen the call? What happens to the call? I know, and I think most of the regions, we've tried to keep that call to an hour. And really, the length of time on that call can be dependent on how many people are on the list. And so I think that's one of the items that we always have to be cognizant of. Do we need to schedule a longer call? Things like that. Managing the expectations of the agencies that are coming in to coordinated entry. We need to make sure people are there for a purpose and that they feel their time is warranted to be there and be part of it. And just facilitating that case conferencing. I know in one of the regions, their case conferencing calls all took place in person until, of course, the pandemic hit. Now they've been doing them over the phone. But, I just think for people, I know the discussions we had in Region 4 were just for time purposes. I think people liked a phone call better than meeting in person for every case conferencing meeting that we had to do. So that's kind of how, Region 4 has ran it, but definitely I think those are things that we need to talk about going forward. And any of the members of Region 4 that were part of last year's conversations, again, and I'm not sure if Stephanie Monroe is on the call or not, but please feel free to, speak up and add conversation to this, because again, it's your guys' region and your guys' coordinated entry case conferencing team. So definitely, and I see Steph is on here. So Tammy Denning, Steph, I know you guys are all, the county. Hopefully some of the county staff was able to get on this morning too. But definitely feel free to add in any information that you want to as we're going through here. Some action steps that we created last year with the case conferencing calls. They wanted to focus on the clients that service providers were working with. So instead of just kind of reading through the list and reading down the list saying, Southeastern, are there any clients that are currently on the list that you want to bring to the table that we need to talk about? Are there agencies that need help with certain parts of, what needs to be done with the client? Any help that they need from somebody else on the case conferencing team? And so we did kind of change that up a little bit. We kind of asked Children's Inn and the ICAP group and Southeastern, are there clients that you want to talk about first before we kind of go into the list and kind of read down the list? The help sheet being created by Helpline, so that's been completed. And engagement to other local agencies, which again, I think that's something that we will always everybody should constantly be thinking about. If there's a service provider you work with that has never even heard of coordinated entry before, have that conversation with them. Or I can be brought into the conversation, Davis, and definitely your regional coordinator. If we need to set up a call with somebody or some agencies to talk about coordinated entry, introduce them to coordinated entry, we definitely are absolutely willing to do that and would be glad to have any of those conversations. And here again, you can kind of see our sheet from last year, kind of our action steps and what we were going to do. And you can see too, we just kind of designated who was going to talk to one agency, And we do have some of these agencies on here that are now definitely a bigger part of that coordinated entry conversation and, are coming to the table with us. So, okay. So let's talk about where we're going to go from here. Again, those core elements, which if you were on the sessions yesterday, we've talked about these core elements many times: access, assessment, prioritization, and referral. Those are really the core basis of what coordinated entry needs to make sure that we cover and that we have processes attached to each of those things. And then, of course, the roles and expectations of anybody involved with coordinated entry. It's always good so people know kind of what is my role, what am I expected to be doing as part of coordinated entry. So our next slide here, I kind of wanted to break down the numbers for Region 4. So I was pulling some reports the other night through Data Explorer for region and for all of our regions. And so this report, the information I was looking at, I kind of started with July 1st of 19 and went through just the day I was working on it, which happened to be July 27th. So you can see in that time frame, we've had 359 households come into coordinated entry, and that equals 909 people, total people. And then you can kind of see the breakdown by county. So out of Region 4, these are the 6 counties where we have had people come into coordinated entry from. So I think some interesting thing is, where are we missing coordinated entry in communities? Where do we maybe need to have some conversations with people, service providers, getting the word out to some of those? Because I have no doubt in all of our, and I think yesterday, the session that we talked, I think in South Dakota totally, I think all of the households that we've had come into coordinated entry were from 26 counties out of 66 in the state of South Dakota. So we know that, we're not maybe getting the phone calls and getting the people from every county. Maybe some of those smaller counties have services readily available to some people, so they're not needing to call into the coordinated entry line and stuff like that too. So it could be a whole host of different things, but I just thought it was interesting for the group to just kind of see what your numbers have been over the past year and kind of what counties that information is coming from. Comments, discussion, thoughts on kind of these numbers and what that means for your area. Please feel free to unmute yourself and
This is Stephanie. Thank you for the overview. I think that just 2 observations, and then I'm really interested in hearing from the group. I think that certainly our engagement and our ability to walk through the action steps from last year, we've certainly had increased agency engagement and partner engagement. I think two general trends that we sort of see over time just within our region is that we know that those individuals that are on the list or that are already service connected to agencies tend to have that follow along. I think one of the things that is a challenge for our region, and I'm sure others, is those individuals that aren't necessarily service connected. So that follow along with those individuals that aren't already connected with a support agency and being able to follow up with them. I know that Maddie does a lot of ongoing follow-up on a month-to-month basis to find out where individuals are at. Certainly, I think we've seen an increase in being able to follow those individuals that are transitioning between the 2 shelters or between 2 service providers. And so I think that has certainly increased over the last year, though just as an example, at our last call, we had probably the largest number of individuals that were living in vehicles. And so obviously that's a very mobile population, and being able to connect with those individuals on an ongoing basis so that we can get them connected to services would be something that the group should consider taking a look at in terms of how we can strengthen those connections and make sure that we're not missing people during that time.
Denise, this is Arlene.
Hi, Arlene.
Hi. I just have a question. I don't know if this is the time or not. Just curious. So if somebody calls the CES, how long does it usually take before they're on the list?
Well, if they call into Madeline, she's live entering that data.
Okay. And We were looking for somebody this morning that we thought called yesterday, but I said we were all at conference, so it may not have gotten entered. Would that be right?
It could be, because, sometimes if they call Madeline and she's not available, which she was in, I think, all of our sessions yesterday,
Right.
her and Eloa is her backup person, they can leave a message and then they will call them back. But as soon as they're talking to them to do the assessment, that's
goes live.
live entering. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, and really, yeah, no problem. And that brings up a good point. I think that, because some people may not be aware of that, but even at our access points, if somebody's sitting down with somebody at an access point, that information is being put in the system live. We don't have in any of our regions where we're filling out paperwork, kind of like some of you are used to with like ESG intakes or the HOF program or something. All of coordinated entry, when you're sitting down with that person or on the phone with that person, that is all entered live into the system. So yeah, definitely, I'm sure yesterday, and I'm sure Madeline can say this, but I'm sure because of all the meetings yesterday, they maybe have messages that they need to return and phone calls that they need to return. So any other comments? Anybody with Steph's information she put out, kind of hearing from the providers on processes and client engagement or client follow-through? I guess I kind of have a question to the group. So within your shelters or agencies or that you're working with, are you hearing, are people aware of coordinated entry? I know we have business cards, we have posters, we have all of those things that we can provide to agencies to be able to hand out to people. And are you feeling like the word is getting out about coordinated entry and people are aware of it and then it's an option for them? Okay, so the group's going to have to speak up. So what are our goals for access? This kind of goes into the question that I just posed to the group. What are our goals as far as what goals do we want to set for, whoops, sorry.
Ashley just posted in the chat, a lot of their guests are told about it at Bishop Dudley, and the posters and cards are helpful. Thanks for that feedback, Ashley.
Yes, absolutely.
This is Eric from the UGM. I really think, what about follow-up? Like, what are we doing coordinating follow-up after they get housing? How are we making sure that they are staying in the same process of continue to have housing with, I don't know, outreach, teaching? How does that all go? Who's doing that? Is that up to us, or is that up to the state, or who's doing that process?
So I think once they're in housing, Eric, if they've come off of the coordinated entry list and been referred to a provider that's going to provide financial assistance for them to get into housing, like definitely through the programs from our office, whether it's the Emergency Solutions Grant, Housing Opportunity Fund, they are required to meet with case managers. So part of them receiving that financial assistance would be once they're enrolled in those programs, then the case manager would be working with them on any of their needs, and if there's other service providers they need to be connected to, really working with that case manager would be handling a lot of that stuff for them.
Okay, how long does that go on for? 6 months to 2 years? We're trying to break that habit of being homeless.
Right.
So what is the process there? And is it, because we don't want them to become, if we get them housing, we don't want them to just drop out of that housing. So is it a 6 months time? Is there a certain amount of time that we work with those folks, or?
So for the programs that I just mentioned, like for ESG, they can have up to 24 months of assistance in a 3-year period. So really the goal of ESG is to be there and provide that assistance until the household is stable and the program can go away. There are other caveats, of course, to any of those programs is, they have to still, the need has to still be present. They have to, fall into the guidelines of income and those types of things. But like with the ESG program particularly, if you're a homeless client coming into the program, income doesn't matter. They don't look at income as a qualifying piece of being in that program. And you don't have to be recertified for that program for 12 months. So truly, ESG has so many different components to it. I mean, the goal of ESG is really to be there for that household until they're stable.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. So when we think about access, so our goals for access is our clients accessing coordinated entry enough. As, are we making it easy enough? Are we getting the information in their hands? So when we think about access, what are our goals moving forward for Region 4 for access? Do we need a different type of access? Do we need, I know yesterday we talked a little bit about a national webinar we had been on where they have an access program that's online. So it's like a web-based, people can access it on their phones, people can access it on the internet. The thing about that to remember is that is almost like somebody calling and leaving a voicemail or a message that they want somebody to contact them about coordinated entry. It's not that they access the system, go through and answer all the questions and their assessment is done. It's again kind of a program that does that. Hey, my name is John Smith and I'd like to talk to somebody about coordinated entry. Online, they can enter that information. So then there's got to be follow through on the back end of somebody contacting them and actually going through the assessment with them. So do we need in Region 4, do we need additional access points? Do we, kind of from the group, what are you guys thinking as far as our goals for access?
This is Madeline. I just had a comment on that because I find when I get voicemails, it's a lot of text subscribe numbers, or like I can't get a hold of the person via the phone number that they called. So I think that definitely different types of access points would be good. Because it's hard to reach a person if they don't have a phone. And then we never get them on the list. They're kind of just hanging there,
Yep.
This is Arlene. I have a question for Madeline or whoever. So when you talk about, or when they call and they are staying at a hotel, how is the question asked about who is paying for it? Because I think some of our clients don't answer that correctly.
So when I call like a hotel, or when I call to ask them about where they're staying, I just get the information directly from them. They tend to just tell me either by county or by Compass Center. Those
You
types of
contact
things.
the hotel directly?
Sometimes, yeah. Mostly in Region 1 is where I get the most hotel phone calls. I've only had a couple in Region 4. Or very few, I should say.
We've had some recently in Watertown and Brookings, and I just wasn't sure they're answering the questions correctly.
Okay.
So, Arlene, are you thinking that there's an agency paying for the hotel, not the client,
Yes.
and that's just not being... Okay.
Right. And I know they are, but I'm not sure the client thinks of that when they're calling. Because we've had a couple that should have shown up on the list and they never did. And I'm just assuming that's what happened.
And do we know for sure that they've called? You know, I mean, I know
I know there's all
that
those
happens
things.
too, but
Yeah, you're right.
Denise, there's a question in the chat box. Do we have a breakdown of how many contacts in our region have been through the phone compared to the physical access point at ICAP? And I think that's a great question to know. You know, what is our volume? Are most people arriving on the list via phone compared to going in person to complete an assessment?
yeah, and I can definitely pull a report that will tell us that and get that information back to you guys. But just off of looking at the list, as much as I do every day, is the majority are coming on through the 800 number, through Madeline, through Helpline Center.
Does Madeline have the capability of texting and using Facebook at all?
I do have access to texting. We haven't talked about like a Facebook option yet with my company, but texting is an option. Or emailing too. Emailing is also an option as well.
I know
This
a lot
is
of our
Betsy.
folks. Sorry.
This is Betsy Helpline Center. And texting is honestly not that successful return messaging, and plus, like, Maddie will maybe use it to try to get them to call her, because to try to do the full assessment over texting is just insane with the amount of questions and trying to do that
Oh,
through
no.
a text.
I would never ask that. That's awful.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if she has the ability to text to get a hold of them.
Yeah, she does, but it's not that successful, to be honest with you.
And so, Betsy, is the breakdown, okay, they text and say, I want to talk to somebody about coordinated entry. When Madeline tries to call them back, then they still don't answer? Or is that kind of or if Madeline gives them the number they call, they're leaving a message? I mean, what's the kind of breakdown with?
Well, Maddie, correct me if I'm wrong. We usually use texting to try to reach them for a follow-up. We don't get many. There's not like the texting currently is set up in our agreement for outreach text, not incoming text. So there's no like separate keyword to say, hey, text this number for homelessness assessment.
Right.
If they should text into 211, like a regular 211 text, we provide them the number, the 1-800 number to coordinated intake. So right now, the only texting is Maddie trying to follow up with someone who's already called in or left a message. But then you also run into, like, some texting, they have to have access to Wi-Fi. So when Maddie sends that text, if they're not in a location with Wi-Fi, do they get it? Do they respond if they get the text 6 hours later? Like that. So there are some barriers to texting. Yeah, we get a hold of some, but it's not as successful as what it would think to be.
The cell phones. Our experience with leaving messages, we never get an answer.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking that if, because I know the problem before when I was doing more of the getting people connected to the assessment was trying to get in touch with the person doing the assessments. So that would be Maddie. You know, I mean, if they go to the bathroom or they have to go take a break or whatever, if somebody's calling, you know, the phone needs to be answered because you are going to have the issue of not getting back to them, not being able to get back to them.
This is Lorraine, and I would like to kind of dig a little deeper into what other methods do you feel would be appropriate for that outreach? I heard Facebook and then if we would have a texting number to come in, we can explore more options, and I would just like to hear what you feel is most appropriate.
I think for our office at county, using Facebook would be, I mean, we don't really get to do that either, but that's how a lot of our folks will communicate with family and other folks is Facebook. And maybe Tammy can talk about her office. I don't know if you guys use Facebook at all to reach people.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yep, we can hear you. All right, good. We have a separate Facebook that we just use for our, we have an agency Facebook, but, that we can certainly put things out on. If need be, but then we also have a separate Sioux Falls Facebook, but the only people that are invited to be on that Facebook and is the clients that we're serving in one of our Bright Futures, our ESG or our Heartland House program. And mainly what that is used for is just to disseminate information out to people. So if there's food giveaways or if there's job openings and things like that. But I mean, we can certainly, to get the word out, definitely put something on there about CES and that too, because they might run into a family or a friend that they can give that information out to also.
Tammy, have you used Facebook to talk to somebody or reach out to them to get a hold of them at all?
I don't know that we have done that. Obviously we don't really have the capability to do that other than our private, Facebooks, our personal Facebooks, and I certainly don't recommend doing that also, but we really haven't.
This is Eric from the UGM. I think the Facebook idea is, for us, is not a good idea. Breaching confidentiality and a few other things that can happen on Facebook with all your clients and their needs. So I think the phone call, the texting, the email, if you can get the phone, email, and information, and that's kind of what we do or what we strive for, or face-to-face contact.
Well, and I'm wondering too if Facebook would be used more as kind of what I typed in here, more as a way to get information out to people, not necessarily, I guess, private information, but just as more of a marketing tool. Does that? I mean, we all know people are on social media, no matter kind of what their circumstance or what their situation is. I mean, I think it's more of a marketing tool to get the information of coordinated entry out to people.
Well, they're using Messenger, so that's why I'm wondering
Right.
if you can ask people if that's a way to contact them or not when you're doing your assessment. That might help.
Denise, I agree with you with the marketing, and if every once in a while something was sent to us, we would gladly put that on our ICAP Facebook. And just maybe quarterly or something, just to remind, because like in our other counties, they're not used to being homeless, and so they may not have meant anything to them when they saw it the first time, but maybe the next time, like Tammy said, they know somebody.
It sounds like just an action step that we need to just spend a little bit more time exploring the use of social media platforms, both for marketing, but then also as a follow-up for those. And I think there's some good points that have been raised about privacy and confidentiality. Some agencies have some limitations. Ours does as well in relationship to the capabilities between a business account and a personal account. But it sounds like that's exploring the use of social media platforms to both as a marketing tool, but also to follow up. Eric brought up something I want to just loop back to for the group, because I think what you've hit on is important, that part of the challenge with the follow-up on the phone is people are mobile or they don't always have the ability to call back. Is this group interested in exploring additional physical access points where people can be entered in that face-to-face interaction?
That's probably a good idea, Steph. Because when you have somebody in front of you, that's the best time to get it done.
Yeah, we spend more time face to face with our clients than anything else, and then people are walking into the streets, or they just come into our office to use the medical facilities. So we see as this gets, for us, for the UGM, as it gets moving for us better, our point of contact will be more face to face, and then follow-up appointments. So setting those appointments, setting goals, and having them put skin in the game to getting back to us instead of always we chasing them. So we'll still have their phone number, we'll still have their email, that we'll try to get those things, but to do the face-to-face intake and then to give them a next appointment to follow up. So really working the system where they have some skin in the game, and it's not always we chase the people that we're helping, that they actually are working together with us. So collaboration.
Well, and I think, this is Denise again, I think another thing to remember here is, so Ashley at Bishop Dudley has access also. And I think Eric's staff, now that, I think we have to remember too, our ESG funded, our COC funded agencies, they'll already have access to HMIS as the system. So giving them access to the coordinated entry work group is really an easy process after that, so really I think the conversation, that has happened last year and some positive changes with Ashley now having access to coordinated entry, and she does enroll people that she works with, the, clients she works with at Bishop Dudley, into the coordinated entry system herself, so I think once Eric's staff is kind of up and running too, I can definitely see that as, because I think early on in some of our coordinated entry, we had some ICAP staff that were at UGM and Bishop Dudley at certain days of the week or something, trying to do some of that enrollment into coordinated entry. So I think now that we have some of the staff from those shelters themselves is kind of coming to the table and part of the discussion, their ability to be able to complete the assessment and enter that information right into the system, I think will be helpful.
I don't know if people are reading the chat. Ashley says, I have access. I would be interested in doing maybe a couple days a month to have people come in and I can enter them. It is easier to enter my families, but other people who stop by or I see them passing, I pass the number along to them. So I think that's great feedback, that part of exploring that particular option is a recognition of the time that it takes to enter. If you have somebody in shelter and you're having regular contact, then it's probably easier to enter them in. For those people that, to Eric's point, you maybe don't have that sit-down meeting with, that would be something that we would just need to keep in mind. So Ashley, to articulate that you're suggesting carving off maybe a couple dedicated times where for those individuals that aren't necessarily being entered on site, that would be an option you want to explore. Is that correct? She says yes. People can certainly call in to me and make an appointment with me, and we can try it that way. Okay, great. Thanks for that feedback.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ashley. And really, I think one of the, conversations from one of our sessions yesterday was, I think Joseph from down in Yankton was sharing, he has a relationship a lot of times with the people that are in shelter. You get to know them. You get to, so it's easier maybe for him to be able to sit down and do that coordinated assessment with them, because he's already aware of a lot of things that maybe we're asking in that VI SPDAT. And, because we do ask a lot of personal questions about their situation. And so I think, too, knowing that with Ashley, the UGM staff, you have that contact with those clients that are in your shelter. And when they're at the point where they're ready to look into housing options and, are at the point where they're ready to kind of make that next step, it is, I think we get better information and clearer information when we do have somebody that is building that relationship with that person that's able to go through that assessment with them, instead of handing them a card and saying, well, here's the 800 number, now call this person and give her all this information and we'll get you on that list. So I appreciate the fact that Ashley and Eric and his staff and stuff, I appreciate that. I think we're getting there, and we're, definitely building some of those provider relationships.
Denise?
Yeah.
This is Arlene. I
Sure.
think we could do the same thing with Amy up in Watertown at our transitional housing program.
Oh, okay.
She works very part-time, but the clients she works very closely with, that maybe those are the ones that are saying they're calling, or we're trying to get them to call. The court services are trying to get them to call. But maybe we could just teach her to do it.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is Eric again. So with us at the UGM, when we do our follow-up and when we do our social work with our people, we are entering them into, we will be entering them all into the system right away. So that's kind of their follow-up of staying here. Is another thing is that we have a 30, 60, 90, 120 day program, just so we can get everybody into the system and start doing our own follow-up and our own care with providing other services and reaching out to other services they don't fit here. So everybody, for us, for the point of entry is where we're going to start doing that immediately. So if they come knocking on our door, that's when the next 2 days we follow up with them, period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts with us. So that's how we're going to get them in the system faster and sooner, just because of we know that they're transitional, right? So they could be here one day and gone the next. We don't know. So we're going to try our hardest to get them followed up with immediately and then see where they stand.
And Eric, I think that brings up a good point. I know in one of our other regions, one of the larger shelters, they kind of have a process too within their shelter, because they do have a lot of people that maybe will come stay one night, they're gone the next day, or they're gone in the middle of the night sometime. But they have a process where after somebody's been there for whatever the set number of days is, they're required to sit down, talk to a staff member, and just kind of figure out what's your plan, what services do we need, so they're ready at that point. They've been there for, again, whatever that set number of days is. And at that point, when they're having that conversation, they've figured is really a good time to then, okay, well, we have coordinated entry. We'd be, let's go through that assessment, get you on that system, because really for those people that hit the shelter and they're gone the next day, it's hard to go through a full assessment with somebody when they're there that short of time. And are they just passing through? Are they really there because, their goal is permanent housing, their goal is, so I think too, having that, like you said, that set schedule of once you're here for 2 days, whatever it is, you're meeting with somebody, we're figuring out what your needs are, I think that's helpful.
Denise, there's a comment in the chat about it's really related to cross-training more than one person at some of those points, so that, and I think you've hit on it, but it's essentially cross-training more than one person if shelters have the availability to do that, to enter, so it doesn't just fall on one individual.
I think it is, and I think we have to remember with the HMIS system, we don't share accounts, we don't share, usernames or passwords, so we definitely have the conversation of what's needed. I mean, we want to meet the need, obviously, so if we have more than one staff person that needs to have access, absolutely, we can definitely talk about that. Some of you may have heard yesterday, it's $82.12 per person per month for a user fee, and we do have a coordinated entry grant. We have some of those types of our ESG funded agencies, get some users covered from their grant already. So definitely making sure we're covering those bases. And I think with a lot of new agencies coming through CARES Act for some of our funding, I think we'll have a growth in our capacity of HMIS and who's accessing it and all of those things also. So, no, I think it's definitely important to talk about. I mean, if there is definitely a real need of not one staff member in a agency, then yeah, we need to have those conversations for sure. And Arlene, I don't know if you can see the chat box, but Don with Beacon Center said that they were not aware of a transitional housing program in Watertown.
Another question in the chat box about outreach to non-English speaking communities. I think that's something to explore in terms of our outreach efforts. I know that we have our materials printed in different, we probably have the ability to print them in different languages, but it would be sort of a question of what that might look like. Or Annie, do you have some specific ideas or specific populations that would be a good place to target, or maybe that's part of just a follow-up conversation in our region in terms of how we might approach that?
Okay, I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself. So, yeah, I think we could have a follow-up conversation. There's probably a lot of opportunities for us to reach out to some different communities and maybe print some material in different languages, like you said.
And I think we have the capability, any of our materials that we create, I'm sure that we can definitely get them in other languages if we need to get that converted over. So I think we have a lot of definite conversation and a lot of kind of goals we've set. So our next screen is going to ask us what our action steps are for these goals. So if we want to talk about different types of access points, what would be an action step attached to that goal? Or is it just a conversation of maybe number 1, the different types of access points, and number 5, additional access points? Maybe those are, kind of go hand in hand, maybe, for discussion purposes, for action step purposes. So I will put, let's go to this screen. If I put access points. Smaller here. And we can go back and forth between these two if we need to. So what are some action steps for the goal of different types of access points, additional access points, when we're talking about access points in general? What are some action steps tied to I'm going to throw one out there, training, I guess. I mean, because as Arlene stated, if we do have somebody, and I think, part of the conversation is all of our outlying counties outside of Sioux Falls. What are I think Watertown, we definitely have gotten some phone calls from that area. We have providers in that area. We have, but it seems like when I've talked to even like Cottington County staff, they're like, nobody ever knows about coordinated entry or how to reach it or how to call it or what's the process of it. So I think if we can get, if Amy would be a good candidate for that and getting her access to that and some of maybe community conversations between Beacon Center and Cottington County and ICAP and, how to, I guess.
And Denise, Amy works very, very limited hours right now. In the future, there might be some changes, but right now she wouldn't have time to do a lot of other. But she works with 5 to 10 transitional housing people every day that need to get on the CES to move out of their transitional housing. A day a week, I meant, sorry.
Wow.
Denise, I wonder if part of that isn't, and then I'm unfortunately going to have to jump off here for another call, so I'll come back around and look forward to working with all of you, but is part of that just exploring the capacity for physical access points in the region? And that, I think we've got some key players here that have identified an interest, and then walking through the steps that would be involved for capacity, whether that's identifying staff or training, as well as the use of some of the social media platform pieces, or that Betsy and Maddie, that's probably a follow-up conversation with you about the phone, the phone piece, and the technology piece.
Hey Denise, this is Dawn in Watertown.
Hi.
Hi. I would be more than willing to work with, Arlene and the county, and maybe figure out exactly what's the best ways to work with different, families here in our area. Of course, we do the DV piece, but I kind of feel like we're kind of hit and miss at times, just because we do have a couple different providers, kind of doing the same stuff, but different paths that they have to go down. So I think if we were all able to, maybe come together, then we can maybe, in Watertown anyway, or in Cottington County, figure out maybe the best way to approach this in our area.
Yep. So as an action step there, I think that's great. And I think definitely because two of those key players that we're talking about are both ESG funded agencies. So working together so we're not duplicating efforts in Watertown, I think that's great. Dawn, can I put on here that, and I can send you contact information or Arlene can or whatever, but just kind of that you'll reach out and kind of start that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be more than willing to do that. I know Arlene, and so we could, whatever or whoever she wants to have us work with, we would be more than willing to kind of figure that out.
Awesome. I think that's great. And I do think some of those outlying areas, definitely that's a conversation you guys can have within your community without the whole Region 4 group as part of the And then at our next meeting kind of coming together and saying, these are some decisions we made and how we're going to handle it. Because I know right now, for instance, if somebody comes on the list outside of Sioux Falls, I have ICAP I can send a referral to. I'll reach out to Beacon Center to see if they have capacity to take a client, so we have some of those kind of steps in place for people, just so that you're all aware. If somebody's, hanging out outside of the Sioux Falls area is on the list, we definitely have. I know Arlene she has access to the list, and just yesterday she said, Denise, send me a referral for this person on the coordinated entry list, so we have those processes that we are making sure to work that process without waiting for a case conferencing call or anything like that. So same with, ICAP in general, even in Sioux Falls, all of the case managers and stuff with ICAP, they just email me. Denise, I can take 3 names off the coordinated entry list, or I can take 2, whatever it is, so we kind of have that working process because of the programs that they have available to clients. So everybody, I should have maybe said that right at the beginning, so you were all kind of aware of when they're on the list, what happens to people that are sitting on the list. So
Denise, this is Arlene,
yep.
and that process works great for us, and thank you for helping with that all the time.
Absolutely.
And yep, we'll work gladly with Dawn. I just think it'd be nice for someplace in Watertown, and you, Dawn, you might have more staff that can do it regularly, that somebody can just go over there and get inputted rather than call a number in Sioux Falls.
Right. Because I think further my conversations with Cottington County, that was a lot of kind of they know people are hearing about coordinated entry. They just don't think that connection is happening where they have to call, or they can't get through at the time, or they don't have minutes on their phone at the time. So yeah, I definitely think that's a barrier a lot of times for people getting on the list. So if we pop back up, social media, I guess that might cover a kind of a big part of our goals that we talked about. Action steps. What would people like to see? Annie also has another question in the chat box. Do we have an inventory of places people are reaching out in the smaller communities? We could send materials to those places. I think that's definitely, so I think that's where maybe we need a little bit of, if there are providers in some of those communities, I would know about people that are tied to ESG or COC, but definitely if we have other people we need to invite, I think that's getting a hold of getting that list, finding out who that is, having a conversation with them about coordinated entry. I think that would be needed. So social media, we talked about Facebook. How would that work? We have some privacy and confidentiality issues. Is it more of just a way to get information about coordinated entry out to people, using Messenger through Facebook to contact people? So what would be some action steps tied to the social media piece for coordinated entry? In the chat box, we do have a couple messages. Carry and dismounts of DSS in Sioux Falls. How long is the list? How long do people on average sit on the list? Just to have an idea for customers that we deal with who mentioned that they contacted CES. I didn't look this morning to see. I think usually the Sioux Falls or the Region 4 list averages between 40 and 50 people at a time that may be on the list. It's been higher, it's been a little lower, but that's kind of the average, I think, of the number that's usually on the Region 4 list. And really, depending on what their needs are, like we'll have some clients on the list that their housing match is permanent supportive housing. And we work really well with the Southeastern staff. So we'll have the conversations of if a rapid rehousing option opens up, even though the person may be matched to permanent supportive housing, would they be okay going into a rapid rehousing type of program? You know, even if it's while they wait for a permanent supportive housing option and those types of things. So we rely a lot definitely on the Southeastern staff to kind of give us that guidance. And we have. They'll say, yep, I think this person would be okay to move into a rapid rehousing program, so we can do that. Other people, really their need, the amount of need that they have, and they really need to wait for a permanent supportive housing option, so we will keep them on the list until we have one of those options opening up. I think the other thing is that sometimes, depending on what they're, you know, if they're a household with children, I think some of those come off the list quicker because of the programs we have available in Sioux Falls. I think with the additional CARES Act funding in Sioux Falls for ESG, that will open up definitely a lot more for, you know, those single households and those types of things. But I mean, it's really kind of dependent on the capacity of our providers and how many clients they can take on and those types of things. And I can run a list to kind of see the average amount of days that people are on the list. I should have done that, but I didn't prior to this meeting. But and Ashley commented, creating a post that has information on it. The poster could be used as a photo that can be shared by agencies on their pages. Nope, I think that's a great idea. Creating a post that can be shared by providers on their social media pages. And Ashley also shared, it might be because I work with mainly families, but it seems that families move off the list and into housing faster than individuals. Yeah, what Denise said. She said, yeah, I mean, and I do think, though, now we're getting more, because the ESG program is not, so I guess a little bit of history. So like with the Heartland House program, their target and priority is households with children. So we definitely see some of those, like Ashley said, families that I think that come off the list faster. We do have ESG funding. We have HOF, which is Housing Opportunity Funding, also in the area. So those can take our single individuals or maybe our adult-only families, and we can only refer as many people as our agencies and our providers have capacity to work with. So I guess that's kind of what. So social media, other ideas. These are your action steps, Region 4. So let's hear from you to meet your goals in Region 4, what you'd like to see done. We have 28 people on the phone. So
can somebody research the Facebook Messenger feasibility and confidentiality stuff? Or if it's an option to even add that during the assessment, asking if they have that ability, if they don't have a good, reliable communication source.
Anybody familiar with working that, checking into that, want to take on that action step? And it can be a couple people. I mean, it doesn't need to all fall on one person. We can have a couple people that want to kind of check into And really, I think, so what would be, how do people start with that? Is it kind of calling some of the service providers and finding out what, because I have heard, I have to say, over the past a few years, more and more agencies that use Messenger to try and get a hold of their clients and stuff like that. So, I mean, I think social media definitely is blowing up in everybody's lives of how they reach out to people. So, is there?
Denise, this is
Yeah.
Lorraine, and I think, with the Facebook, someone's going to have that page or be providing that information. And with this being a statewide, this might actually fall back on us more to kind of look into it, and working with the helpline to kind of determine how that really may or may not work. So maybe that's something that we can have the new position kind of look into, because it sounds like we need to do a lot more on the whole marketing piece as well.
Yeah,
So
I would
we can
agree.
just kind of work with our marketing department to see about some of those avenues, if we even want to do a separate Facebook page, or if we want to start generating some of those posts that we can share with the partner agencies. So since this is kind of a statewide thing, and not necessarily a region, we would definitely love to have some help from
Yeah.
the region. But this might be something that we just need to kind of take on as well.
Okay. And I think too, this creating I think these kind of go hand in hand, these two things here.
And this is Betsy with the Helpline Center, and I would say from a marketing perspective, one of the things that we get on the phones is people do get angry with Maddie because they think she can immediately place them. And so then they get fairly upset to say, well, why did I call this number if you can't give me a place to stay tonight? Or when she explains the process. And so I think that's just something we need to be cognizant of how do we market that so there's some type of understanding that they don't call the number for immediate, placement by Maddie, that there's a process they need to go through.
No, I think that's a great point, Betsy. And I think, too, for anybody who is providing clients with the 800 number or, suggesting that they call, I think that's definitely a conversation to be having with people is, this is a way that our service providers are working together to get housing, but calling, I think you're right, that they're not, calling that number's not getting you into an apartment today.
Yeah, they'll call at 5 o'clock and get upset with Maddie that she doesn't have an apartment for him to move into. Of course, she provides the shelters and all the other information we can, but I think sometimes there's just a misperception that it's immediate placement when they call. Then they get upset and either don't call her back for more information to continue the process. So that is one barrier. I don't know how we overcome that, but that they're looking for immediate solution.
Okay, let's hop back up here for a second. So I think the additional physical access points, I think we kind of have some action steps kind of built right in here. I am going to, because I think it's important that adding staff from UGM and exploring additional staff at Bishop Dudley. And able to complete. I think that will be super helpful. And two, I mean, if there are, Ashley, I'm sure there's conversations you have to have, internally at Bishop Dudley. Definitely, whenever you guys want to bring us into those conversations, if you want to, let me know if there are certain days, because we can definitely change our marketing materials to whatever decisions are made, with those agencies. So definitely keep us in the loop. And like I said, if you need us to join conversations, we're happy to do that too. So. What are our other goals? The non-speaking communities, I did, if you didn't see that, add that into kind of our marketing pieces, so that we can get those materials. Whatever new materials we come up with, we'll make sure that those are available. Okay. Any other questions, comments before we move on? We still have three other of our elements here that we need to get into. So assessment, and some of these too probably maybe tie back to some of our conversations we've had previously. If we talk about assessment goals, do we want to think about, I think it's hard to put a number on things. Like, I don't think we can be like, we want 300 people, that have had assessments completed in the next, but really assessment. So our assessment goals, do those go back to tie to some of our access goals? Because really, I think if we add some access points, I think assessment really is going to tie into that also with, just the ability to perform some of those assessments in more locations. And
Denise, did you want any action steps on the getting an inventory of the places for smaller areas, or even Sioux Falls, where we have a lot of the little housing programs that aren't involved? Is there some sort of, I'm sure 211 has some sort of inventory, but maybe even places that aren't maybe top of mind where people are reaching out, that might not be.
Yeah, no, I think that would be important to, and I think that kind of does go into, what providers do we have out there that aren't coming to our table yet, or part of that. And I think if we look back to, we had some pretty clear set steps, when we met last year. We have this group of agencies and providers that we had people assigned to reach out to, and really kind of that conversation of, do they know what coordinated entry is? Are they familiar with coordinated entry? So, I think we've gotten a few of these to the table, but we don't have anybody that comes regularly to case conferencing from, St. Francis House, Glory House, Oxford House. We just don't. We get clients from those places that are calling in to the 800 number, but I don't know that we have. So would that be, let's see. Yeah, that probably goes to add. So do we want to add an action step to our access for additional partners, additional?
I feel like you at least want to come up with the list or the inventory. Maybe 211 RD can pull that up with their magic keystrokes.
And City and Separate launched our help list tool, so anybody can run customized lists on our website based on county and the service you're looking for. And that is helplinecenter.org/help-list. And there's a nice little video right there. And so, like, for example, you can, like, I have Coddington County selected for my county. If I go into housing, I can select all the different housing terms that a program may serve. So, for example, low-income subsidized housing, then I can quickly make a PDF of all the providers that are providing that in Coddington County.
I did not know that was even available.
Okay, Betsy, we just need 66 more of those then, or 65 more of those. Those searches.
So helplinecenter.org / what was it?
Help list is customized list that is available by county level.
And I
So
think that
encourage
would... Go ahead, Betsy. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and you can add as many terms as you want. Just realize the more terms you add, the longer it might take to build because it's scanning the 5,000 resources in our database. But that was launched in February, so I encourage that. If there's, I can talk offline, Denise, on what a list would look like. We do have a process for that because it does take staff time to create a list for all 66 counties. That would just probably be more of an offline conversation on how to do that.
Well, and I think this will be really good information too when the group comes, the statewide group comes back together later today, because I think that's something that every region should be looking at, talking about, you know, really, I think that would be really good information for all of our regions to be aware that that's available, because I think, like Annie said, that's really probably a good place to start of getting materials to those places, getting information, starting that conversation. So I made a note, but for sure we're going to be doing some region reporting when we all come back together. So Betsy, if you don't mind, if you're going to be part of that conversation, to make sure that we're letting all of the regions know that that's available, because I think that's a great...
And the other thing that Maddie had mentioned before I was able to get on is we also have help sheets available that we continue to create. So help sheets are topic-based information that you can print out. We text these out all the time to people when they call in about questions. And so under basic needs, there is affordable rent, housing, evictions, but we also recently, with help with Annie, launched a rent calculator and how much can you afford. And so this is a tool that you can put in and get like different ranges of rent based on what you feel comfortable of. Nice. And then if you want the results emailed to you, you can just put in your email and then the results are emailed. Otherwise, you can just keep running numbers and never have to submit any information and see what it is.
I also posted the link. This is Madeline. I posted the link to the help sheets in the chat box.
Okay.
And then the rent calculator, the short link I can post, it's honestly helplinecenter.org / rent.
Hey, Betsy, can you also, or Madeline, can you guys post the links to the subsidized housing list too? That's probably handy. It's off topic, but.
I don't know. I got to find that because I don't know if we have those public, do we? Or do we just text those out when people call in?
Yeah, I think she made the 2 links that are public. I think. Well, I guess I don't know. We'll check on that.
Since those lists are not statewide, they wouldn't be on help sheets because we really push for help sheets to be able to be applied across the state. And since those are Sioux Falls only, I think those are just, like, if people call in, we text them out.
Well, it's Sioux Falls area with the smaller towns on it, so I know that this is kind of our region, so it might make sense to just send them to this group.
Yeah, I can still do that. I just don't know where the links are right off the top of my head.
Okay.
And would those lists have properties outside of what's on SD Housing Search as well?
I'll be honest, I have not toyed with Housing Search that much.
Okay.
So I'm not totally sure, but I have worked with Tasha on some of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I would say, Lorraine, off of 211, our number one referral would be SD Housing Search. When people call in looking for housing.
Yep. Okay. And again, if you guys ever have like questions or concerns or anything that we can improve upon an SD housing search, just let us know too. So we'd gladly do that. Since we're not the ones using it, it's kind of hard for us to really know what works and what doesn't. So.
Yeah, we've referred to SD housing search over 1,200 times, so we're definitely sharing that one.
That's great. And I think, too, again, just that reminder, I think, to all of our regions of maybe the capabilities and the information that maybe is already readily available to people from 211, I think is going to be a good reminder for all of our agencies.
And I can just give a teaser. I can't tell you specifics, but we'll have some very exciting announcements coming in the next 4 to 6 months. So that's my teaser, dealing with websites and technology. We're just working on conversations. Well, it just started. It just started yesterday, so I want to give us some padding, depending. Like the help list creation took us a year because that was a custom development. And so we're trying to move this one a lot faster. So fingers crossed it'll be before 4 months, but we just started yesterday on this idea.
Awesome.
So more to come. But if you guys have other ideas, certainly send them over. We're always looking to innovate, but always we'll be honest with you with like what that cost would be. Because with technology, obviously, comes cost. We try to do a lot in-house, so we do as much as we can in-house, but we always can't pull it off in-house.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Betsy.
Mm-hmm.
So assessment, our assessment goals. As far as, and if you guys were on yesterday, you kind of saw us walk through the entire workflow. So you kind of saw the assessment. Again, we have some data elements that are required of our COC to collect. So thoughts, questions, ideas on the assessment for the workflow that people, questions that they answer. Again, the VI SPDAT is what's used for the vulnerability tool to score people. So are there other things that you think are necessary in the assessment, things that should be taken out of the assessment?
So Denise, as far as the scores, that tells you what type of housing the person needs, correct?
Right.
And how much housing do we have in each of those categories?
Inventory of housing is always going to be probably the thing that's, I think, always needed in most of our communities. For sure, our permanent supportive housing. We don't ever have a lot of openings in permanent supportive housing. And I think when HUD rolled out coordinated entry, they were aware that permanent supportive housing is vacancy is an issue in a lot of places across the country. Their directive is that even though somebody may be matched to permanent supportive housing, if a rapid rehousing opening becomes available, that they should definitely be considered for that rapid rehousing opening. So that's kind of earlier when I, that's why case conferencing is super important, because those people that are sitting on that list, a lot of times we definitely rely on the agency that maybe is working with, and we have a lot of our people that are matched to permanent supportive housing are already service connected with the Southeastern staff. So we definitely rely on information from them of, yes, this person, could go into a rapid rehousing situation while they're waiting for a permanent supportive housing opening, and stuff like that. So there are some people that really would not be successful in a rapid rehousing referral, even with the wrapped around services. They're already service connected to Southeastern, those types of things. So I think that part of that case conferencing is absolutely getting that information from those providers that they're already working with. So, and I mean, we can look at our scores appropriate, right now, just to remind everybody. So if somebody scores 0 to 3, they're not matched to a housing match. That does not mean that they don't need services or they wouldn't end up being referred, but they're definitely a 0 to 3 is going to be probably sitting towards the bottom of that list. And more than likely, most of those households are going to self-resolve what their situation currently is. And then 4 to 7, the scores match them to rapid rehousing or transitional housing. And then 8 plus, the household gets matched to permanent supportive housing. So definitely, I mean, that should be topic of conversation when we're talking about assessment. Are those scores realistic? Are those scores working?
Well, that's what I was wondering. Like, do we even need, like, if we don't have the inventory, then why are we scoring people? Is it just because HUD wants to make sure that we're housing the most vulnerable? Do we have a different assessment that we can look at? Or no?
I'm sure there's other assessments that are available out there.
Or is there one that we could make from scratch based on what makes sense for our state?
We absolutely always have that ability. But again, I think we have to look at the reason, so I can say the reason a few years ago when we were statewide all working together and creating our coordinated entry is the VI SPDAT is something that's definitely used the most probably across the country. As Davis shared yesterday, I think it definitely comes with some criticisms. Is it culturally sensitive? Does it meet, the criteria for all of our different populations? But I think from what I heard at most of the national conferences I go to, I think any assessment that COCs are using or creating, I think there's always that question that comes up is, does the assessment absolutely work for every single person and every single household? I don't know if we'll ever have an assessment that does. I think creating an assessment, as most of you saw yesterday, the assessment is in depth. There's a lot of questions that go into it to come to that score. And we also know it's a self-reported information. So that's probably one of the other important pieces of case conferencing is we've had different service providers that are working with a client on the list, and when they see the score, they'll be real honest and say, that score should be much higher. That person has way more needs, that person, and so we know that's going to happen with, I think, any assessment that we probably use and work with. And so one of the nice things with that case conferencing process is we have the ability then to either have that case manager sit down and go through the assessment with the client themselves, especially, again, if it's somebody they're used to working with and familiar with, or we also have the ability to put that information in case notes that this household has a very high need and, their score is not reflective of some of those needs. So, I mean, we do have those abilities to, again, either do an updated assessment personally between the case manager and the client. I think we get a lot of maybe more accurate information when that's able to happen, or we have the ability to kind of say, nope, they need to be higher up on the list and, referred next in line if possible. So.
Yeah, that's why I was just thinking that if we could have, a few folks that work closely with the assessment and the people that are taking the assessment to get together and maybe put some ideas together what would make more sense. Because I know that I had at least one lady where she didn't answer truthfully to most of the questions, because I mean, I wouldn't want to admit to most of that stuff either, if it was me. And so we had her take it again, and yeah, she got a score that was more reflective of her situation. But
Yep. So the assessment itself, I mean, I guess is there interest in looking at different assessments? Is there interest in, do we need to look more at, are our scores appropriate for the match that they have? I guess, is that something we want to explore? Is that something?
I mean, everything that I just said is more work, and nobody has time probably for that. I guess I would like to just at least have a conversation with some of the people that I know are intimately involved with it, like Maddie and Tammy and Kim, or those folks at Southeastern. I'm missing people, but you get the idea.
This is Lorraine. I'm just going to toss this out there. I think that's a good idea to constantly be looking at the assessment tool that we're using, but knowing that we now need to be looking at what kind of assessment tool we potentially will be using for prevention, homeless prevention. I don't know if we can devote the time to be looking at our other one at this point in time, or do we want to focus our efforts on the prevention assessment and then come back later to the other one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's accurate. And as Annie said, I mean, we definitely, every time we set goals, we're going to have action steps, and somebody's got to do some work to, work on those action steps. So, I mean, I think it's definitely, we need to be realistic. And not that we can't, put these goals out here. This is something we can come back to, something, we can look at. But, yeah, I mean, I think we definitely need to be realistic in our processes. And inventory. So with the inventory, so what is an action step that would go to that inventory? Because I think, too, we'll get down here more to prioritization, referrals, so I think some of these definitely tie into, when we're talking about inventory, I think that ties definitely straight into referring. Do we have housing programs available to refer everybody to? Do we have...
Well, Denise, I'm going to toss this out there, and I will try to remember to also state during your entire wrap-up, we have, of course, funding to develop housing, and we need more permanent supportive housing, and we need more permanent housing that's affordable. So we have housing developers, but we also have service agencies, and just trying to find the two partnership to create more housing would be great. And we have housing trust funds, which is federal funds, but it's targeted at 30% AMI, and we provide that as grant funding. And each year we have yet to fully utilize the funds. So we've got the funding mechanism in place. We just need the partners to make it happen. So definitely this is something that we need to work on, is to get those housing units, as well as, like you said, is there other programs or other ways of using funds to help support the housing that's out there. So that's a continual conversation, and if anyone wants to talk offline, please let me know. But I do know we're going to be working forward on some rural collaborative TA, which will help provide capacity building in rural areas to develop permanent supportive housing. So that'll start here in August. And right now we have Pine Ridge, Yankton, ICAP. Those are the three that are coming to mind right now as originally saying, yes, they were interested in that endeavor. So hopefully that'll help generate additional partners, resources, capacity building. But yeah, so we will continue to work on inventory, but I would welcome any conversations if somebody is interested in taking on a different role and actually developing some housing. Thank you.
We always like to put that plug out there for sure, because we do hear that. I mean, from everywhere all the time, that we don't have any housing. We don't have any housing. So I think it's great that we're always kind of plugging it. So do we have action steps that kind of go with these? Inventory, I think Lorraine just kind of talked about. Scoring. Do we need to, what's an action step do we need to, and Annie, like you said, is that more should we bring some specific, and again, I think the scoring is a statewide conversation, because obviously, our scoring system will affect all of the regions in our statewide system. So do we need to, as an action step, bringing that to the statewide group? Because that is something that, there are certain things, I think, action steps and goals definitely that are region specific. And then I think there's definitely things that we need to bring to the group as a statewide group. Scoring would be one of those things, because it will affect the entire assessment and, the entire statewide group. So.
Hi, this is Kim. I stepped out of the room for a moment, and our maintenance man was in my office and said, "Oh, they were beckoning you."
Oh, that's funny.
So, did you have a question that I can help answer?
No, Kim, I volunteered you for something. You're welcome.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And I think what's important too also is when we bring new people in and new agencies, I think that helps us to grow and to think of other things that maybe we haven't thought about. And so I think Annie is definitely bringing some great ideas and some great, action steps that we need to have some of those conversations. And sometimes it's a matter of, again, do we need to locally have some meetings to really talk about coordinated entry? We had discussed this before about, having some regional meetings in place in the region to really bring people together and get the word out about coordinated entry. And I think we might be getting to the point, and I think it'll be kind of good timing with, if you guys didn't hear yesterday, we have a coordinated entry position that's going to be open through South Dakota Housing. So we're going to bring somebody in to really kind of take coordinated entry on as their project, and they're going to administer it. And, so I think we will see definitely some changes, some growth, a lot of things happen. We have the whole prevention piece that we're now going to be adding to coordinated entry, which is going to bring just a whole nother group of items and action steps and goals to, I think, our coordinated entry system. So. Let's see. So our assessment, I think we have the tool. I think, again, that would be discussing as a, state. Do we have the sorry. I think that's a definite, good question that Lorraine brought up as far as time and staffing, because our homeless piece of this is going to take on kind of, I think, a life of its own. Everybody will also need to be involved in, I think, those conversations and what that tool needs to look like. So I think this also feeds kind of right into our next subject of prioritization. Currently our...
Hey, Denise.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have a question about the last thing.
Yeah.
For the prevention, so are these going to be two different assessments then? Prevention and then the homeless, or what?
Yes. So what we'll be doing is our goal is to obviously house them in the same system. Our coordinated entry system as it is now, when you answer a question that somebody's living situation is more of a prevention, so they're calling in and they're facing eviction right now, they're living with a sister or a friend, the coordinated entry system will divert you out of the system. And so what will be happening once we add that prevention piece to it is if you answer that type of prevention type of question, the system will take you through a prevention assessment. And so OrgCode, who created the VI SPDAT, has also created a prevention SPDAT, basically, a PR SPDAT, I think is what they call it. So that'll be definitely one of the assessment tools that we'll be looking at. SSVF has a prevention tool that they use across the country. And I also got, through connections with other COCs, I got a kind of an ESG prevention tool that somebody had sent to me. So I think, just again, kind of like we did a few years ago when we created our coordinated entry system, is we'll be going through some of the same steps, creating that prevention arm of coordinated entry. So, but yeah, definitely I think the PR, the prevention assessment, is different than what the regular VI SPDAT for the homeless assessment is. There's different questions. And I think there's different needs and different, we'll have to come up with policies and procedures and all of those things for our prevention piece of coordinated entry also. But it'll be housed in the same system as coordinated entry currently is. And, I think one of the things I mentioned in one of the sessions yesterday, prioritization, we do have the ability to change our prioritization. So right now our prioritization is the highest score, is kind of at the top of the list, and those are the people that we should be looking at housing first. They're going to be the hardest to house, and it could be anywhere from somebody having, needing that permanent supportive housing, so they have some mental health needs, maybe some disabilities, to the person that's maybe a sex offender and obviously is going to be a harder person to house. So our prioritization right now, we look at the score and their housing match, if they're chronically homeless, so do we need to look at our prioritization as far as right now what's happening across the state with COVID, and making those households that are at greater risk of contracting COVID, spreading COVID, should they be prioritized over other households right now? So that would be people living unsheltered, people living in congregate shelters. So our prioritization, do we have different goals going into this next year than what our current prioritization is? Do we need to look at changing our priority? And we have the ability to say we're going to change our priority for, this 6 months because of what's happening with the pandemic. So our priority is going to change to those that come on coordinated entry that are living unsheltered or in congregate sheltering. we're going to get those off our list first and get them referred to a program to get into permanent housing. So. Anybody? Goals? Changes? Anything we want to look at for prioritization? Do you guys think that we need to change our priority for the pandemic that's happening right now? Obviously, your guys' area was one of the areas that blew up very early in the pandemic process. Do you think that's still a need where we should look at changing the priority with our coordinated entry system?
I think it would be great if we could keep people from that communal living, just because it's going to spread faster at the homeless shelters if people are living in a space so close together. How we do that, I don't know.
I think we also have to look at how are we keeping people housed so they don't become homeless, that prevention piece. Like, for example, the centralized food distribution, we run the technology for it. They served 1,100 people yesterday on a Tuesday, and they can come every other week to that, and so the need just continues to increase. That's a record number that they've served. So with the $600 a week going away of extra unemployment, I just see our housing eviction potential or rent payment calls just increasing.
Mm-hmm.
And like Sioux Falls, which was amazing, I think that helped a ton of people. However, that's starting to transition away to a new format, just because a lot of people are thinking they're time to get back to normal, which we all know we're very far from normal. So I think, how can you readily make more rent payment assistance, utility assistance available? Because the other thing is utility assistance companies stopped, shut off notices or payment notices, and they're all starting those back up. So like Black Hills Energy is starting those back up. And so you now have those bills on top of trying to pay for rent.
Mm-hmm.
This is Arlene from ICAP.
Yep.
And as we mentioned before, we have the CAP agencies receive the grant, the CARES grant that covers utilities and rent. We are about 3/4 through our first allotment of money, and if the next CARES Act, I can't remember what it's called now, gets passed, then there will be a ton of money, or a lot of money, that we will receive as a continuation of that grant. But we have covered a lot of utilities and rent for people. And it's 200% of poverty, so it's higher than our normal.
So our priority right now is, it was veterans, and what were the priorities?
Veterans and chronically homeless, and families, I think, is right up. I think, yeah, it's veterans, then I think it's chronic, and family, households with children. And truly, I mean, if a veteran ever does hit our coordinated entry list, we are automatically referring them out to veteran service organizations, whether it's SSVF, whether it's GPD, whether it's the VA. I mean, so truly, I think right now, if we look on our list, I'm guessing we don't have probably any veterans on the list, because we do get them referred out really quickly. And we have a separate group that gets together and does a veterans by name list that they work with. So I think we definitely get them off the list pretty quickly, because they have just so many funding opportunities that are available to them.
Yeah, and we don't have any flexibility with doubled up families. Does it have to be literally homeless?
So once the prevention piece comes into play, then that's where they'll be able to be on the list. So right now, currently, as our coordinated entry system stands, yes, they would have to be literally homeless, and that's by HUD's definition. So doubled up is not a literal homeless definition under HUD. But with that prevention piece, I mean, that's going to open that up now to those additional families.
So what does that mean? So, like a doubled up family could go on the list for Heartland House?
Well, it won't change. So that'll give the ability for those families to be able to access coordinated entry and be on the list. That doesn't mean that the programs that are in place change necessarily their eligibility. But we have ESG and HOF, all of those other programs but for Heartland House, and I think Tammy's on. I mean, Tammy, feel free to, but I think those are geared towards homeless families.
Right, and our priority will remain for Heartland House will remain literally homeless unless there are no other literally homeless families on the CES list. And then we can move to those that are doubled up or at imminent risk. And then for Bright Futures, though the priority is flip-flop, so the priority is at imminent risk families with children. And then if there are no more imminent risk families, then we can flip-flop to the CES waiting list. So that will remain the same.
So I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around what do we have flexibility on for priorities?
So this would be if we want to right now change the priority of those people that are on our coordinated entry list. So do we want to make people that are living in congregate sheltering or unsheltered right now a priority because of the pandemic that's happening? So we want to make housing those households first a priority so that we can get them out of congregate shelter.
I was thinking they were already the priority because they're in shelter.
Well, they're homeless, so they're on the list. But really, right now, I'd say our priority is we definitely look at what their score is. I mean, that's first and foremost. People are on the list. We look at the list by score. So after that, then, so even though maybe I'm in shelter and I scored a 4, but can I be prioritized because I'm living in shelter and I need to get out of shelter because of the pandemic that's happening? So I've become, even though my score may show that I'm scoring very low, can I be referred to an agency because of my current living situation and the pandemic that's happening right now?
Okay, well, I have another meeting, so I'll stop asking questions. See you guys later.
Thanks, Annie.
Thanks, bye.
And I think I have another meeting that starts at 10:30. Davis can start that one for us, but I guess I'm. And again, I think all of this goes back to what is our capacity for referring people off the list. I mean, that's always going to be the thing that probably, runs how many people get referred off the list is what our capacity is of providers that are able to take people off the list that we can refer to and, keep that list kind of moving is going to be based on, what our access is in all of those communities. When we have somebody hit the list in Madison or hit the list in Watertown or, how quickly can we get people referred? All of that is going to be based on our partner agencies that are coming to the table and saying, yep, we have capacity to take on 3 clients, so refer 3 clients to us. I think that always is going to come back to that. So I think that's something to keep in mind, but we can definitely, because when I get a request for referral from Heartland House staff, I look at the list and I start at the top because those are the highest score people So those are our people that are hardest to house and most vulnerable. So when I'm going down the list looking at who I can refer, that's what I look at. So if we're changing our priority to be, we want to see those people that are living in a congregate shelter as our priority, that changes how we look at the list and how we refer people. So do we feel like there's a need to do that right now?
So Denise, this is Arlene again. Since they're all literally homeless, whether they're living in their car or hotel, aren't they still susceptible to going places that COVID would be around rather than being in their own apartment?
Yep,
or do you think
absolutely.
the shelter is should we have more points for the shelter?
Right. Yeah, and that's something to consider because unsheltered for sure. I mean, they're saying that people, and some of our communities don't have necessarily true encampments, where homeless people are staying, but that would definitely be if we have people that are staying in an encampment. So they're outside, they're in close quarters, but really truly HUD is saying those people that are staying right now in those congregate shelters, those are the people that we should be. And yes, everybody that comes on the list, they might be, it's truly some people are on the list because they're staying in a motel room that somebody else is paying for them, whether it's county or a service provider agency or somebody. So for me right now, those people that are staying in that motel room, even though they might be there for a limited amount of time, somebody staying in a congregate shelter needs to get out of the congregate shelter quicker probably than the person in the, motel room. So, there are things to consider. And I think just the important thing is knowing we have the ability to change that prioritization if we need to, depending on what the situation is and what's happening in our regions and our communities. Let's see here. So too, I think our referral, I think again is, what agencies we have at the table. I think CARES Act is definitely affording us, growing relationships, growing partnerships, with the ability of more funding always comes the ability to bring more people to the table. Making sure that, we're taking into consideration we have this huge influx of money happening right now, but, we'll go back to our traditional ESG after that's over. And so having the funding up front to be able to take care of some of those needs right now and those priorities right now, and hopefully creating some programs that can be long-standing and apply for traditional ESG after, some of the CV money goes away and stuff. So I think we are bringing more agencies to the table through that process. So hopefully we'll have some more capacity of more referrals going out. And questions, comments on the referral process? Do we think the referral process is working? As Arlene said, I think with the ICAP, for sure, with all their different programs, we have a really good kind of process for that group. And as we bring on new providers, we'll just figure out what the right process is for, those providers. And I do lean back on ICAP staff if we have new providers kind of joining conversations and helping us to, be a mentor to some of those new agencies that are coming on, and they definitely graciously have stepped up and are always willing to do that for us. So we definitely appreciate that. Let's see here. and I think Steph had it off for another call. So too, I think some of our regional coordinators, case conferencing, I think some of these, unless we kind of have our whole group, I think, to go over and talk about some of these things, I think maybe we need to look at maybe scheduling a time that we can bring the region players back together and kind of have those conversations. Lorraine, thoughts, feelings on kind of how we should proceed? What do you guys think? Do you guys want to look at a time where we can schedule a separate meeting and schedule just some, time where we know everybody can kind of come to the table? And I'll send out the information. We'll make so that we can look back at some of our kind of goals and action steps going forward and kind of what we're looking at. But the people that are on here, I know we have Tammy, we have Helpline Center, Kim, staff, are we thinking our case conferencing schedule? Do we have any ideas, changes? Do we think it needs to happen more often? Right now, Region 4 meets once a month. Crickets. I'm hearing crickets, people.
Hi, this is Madeline.
Hey, Madeline.
Hey, I do think if it's at all possible to meet maybe a little bit more often. I don't know. I think it would be helpful.
Yep. I actually would definitely agree with you. I think that Region 4 right now is the only region that only meets monthly. I think the other regions all meet at least twice a month. And this is the biggest region that usually has the most number of people on their list. So I think that's definitely something that we should talk about and figure out what that looks like moving forward. But again, I think we need to have, maybe at our next, I can send out an email to you in our next meeting. Maybe we can kind of talk about that when because we usually have a lot of the groups of people at the, most of our service providers and everybody at those case conferencing calls. And I think too, we've kind of had some conversations with county that we're going to do some intermittent, once people hit the list, if they're not service connected with anybody or anything like that, that county is maybe going to step up and be able to make that first contact with people, just so we can get them tied to somebody. Because as we heard earlier in the conversation, that really is the best way to keep contact with people, is once they're service connected, have a case manager and stuff like that. So we're going to work on maybe doing that also. And we do see in the chat box here, Kobe with Children's Inn agrees to meet more often, every couple weeks. And Ashley also from Bishop Dudley thinks that it would be more helpful. So I absolutely am on point with that. I think that would be important. So we can have those conversations and kind of discuss what that schedule would look like, I think, with our group. I think that would be good. And we kind of talked about the prevention piece on and off throughout our conversation. I think statewide, when we have those discussions, we'll really be kind of getting into more of kind of what we think that's going to look like for our build out. I think it's also going to add some, are there other providers we need to add? Are there other, service agencies we're going to need to reach out to, bring to the table what that prevention piece looks like? Because I think, as we know, as Helpline Center has shared with us, the amount of phone calls that come in for people that are facing eviction, I think that potentially is going to be a very large number of people coming to the table, so coming to our list and in our system. So we really have to be prepared for what that's going to look like, I think, moving forward. So please, I hope everybody can join later today. We have our kind of wrap-up session where we bring all the regions and everybody back together. So I definitely encourage everybody to, statewide starts at 3 o'clock Central Time, which will be 2 o'clock Mountain, but I think it'll be important to definitely come back together as a group and really discuss some of the things that we discuss now for statewide, that prioritization, the scoring, is that appropriate for how it is right now? And absolutely our session 5, which starts at 1 o'clock Central Time with rapid resolution. Jack Smith from Cornerstone Rescue Mission is going to do a presentation. I think rapid resolution is going to come into play more often, especially as we're adding that kind of eviction, that prevention piece into our system. How can rapid resolution help for some of those families and reconnecting them to maybe some relatives and family and stuff like that. So I think that rapid resolution discussion will be really important. I'm glad that Jack can do that for us. So questions, comments, anything else before we kind of wrap up? Does anybody have anything? Thank you guys all for your time. Appreciate it. If nobody has any more comments, questions, discussion topics, we can go ahead and hopefully I see all you guys at 1 o'clock for our next session.
Hey, just a real quick, are you going to send out this PowerPoint and the things that you're writing too?
Yep, I will. Eric, we'll put the link. We'll put it on our Housing for the Homeless Consortium website. And I'll also send it out to the Region 4 group so everybody has it.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Super. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Guys, have a great day.